Good morning, everyone. My name is Stacy Simpson, and I'm the Associate Director of Events for Medill. And we welcome you all to our High School Journalism Live program for today. We are very, very excited to have three of our grads, our Medill grads, come back to campus to join us in this discussion today and share with you what their lives are like now as professional journalists and what life was like as a Medill student. So we encourage you through this panel, please post your questions in the chat and we will get to those questions. And, you know, really, if you want to ask them about what it was like being a student or, you know, please do that. We're excited to, we have a number of people with us today from all over the world, the benefits of being on Zoom. And one of the fun things we're doing with these programs is within each workshop, we are pulling a name randomly at the end of our program. And whichever person's name I pull out of our list, if they're still here at the end of the program, they will receive a fabulous branded Medill baseball hat. Let's see if I can get it in the camera. There we go. And I will send that out today right after our program to the lucky winner. So we hope you'll hang on until the end. We are recording this program, so you will automatically, once we add captioning to the video, which takes us a couple of days, we will post it to our Medill YouTube channel, and I will send you directly an email with the link to the recording. So you can rewatch in case you've missed something along the way. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Patti Wolter, who is one of our fabulous faculty members from Medill. And she is also, her title is the Helen Gurley Brown Magazine Professor and Charles Deering McCormick Distinguished Clinical Professor, which is a great mouthful. And I'm sure your business card, it's really, really tiny on there to get all that on there. But what she is a terrific professor. She develops wonderful relationships with her students. And I'm here to tell you, we were just talking with everybody and she's still in touch with them, even though they've long ago left Evanston. So it's terrific. And I think Medill is one of those places, it's a small college. And so you really do get to know your faculty, your professors, and have an opportunity to build those relationships. So Patti, thank you for leading our program today, and I will turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. I would just want to start with another welcome and actually a big thank you for taking the time to join us. I have a daughter who's a senior in high school, and I know that while remote learning is remote learning and it seems like life should be more flexible, it actually often feels like you're constantly in demand to be on Zoom in very specific timetables. So I know that it was no small feat for many of you to join us. And for those of you who are seniors, I know that this is like crunch time, that your life right now is full of horrific supplemental essays and many sessions like this across the board at different schools. So I appreciate the time, but I will tell you one more thing my daughter told me, that she's attending lots of different sessions such as this, and she said her favorite thing to do is lurk in the chat and see everybody where everybody's from. So I would love for everyone to just go to the chat right now and put your year in school and your hometown and country, and then that gives you all something to lurk and see kind of the breadth and depth of the kinds of people interested in journalism in Medill, and you can thank her for that little tip. Now and while you're doing that, I'm going to introduce, oh wow, we're already getting some amazing options. I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'm going to start just in alphabetical order and have them wave wildly when I say their name, and then I'll give you their bios. So first is Maddie Burakoff. Maddie wave, all right. Maddie Burakoff is a digital reporter covering public health and other local stories for Spectrum News 1 in Milwaukee as part of the Report for America program. She graduated from Medill in June with both her bachelor's and master's degrees. We offer the special combined accelerator master's program. Obviously, those are in journalism, and she minored in Spanish. She spent her college years as a reporter and editor for the Daily Northwestern, our student newspaper, and led the campus chapter of Asian American Student Journalists. She's previously interned with CNN and Smithsonian Magazine and spent this summer freelancing on the New York Times coronavirus tracking team, which we'll get to ask her about a little bit more. Rachelle Hampton is next. Wave, Rachel. Rachel graduated from Medill in 2017. She's a culture writer and reporter at Slate, which is a lot of people's dream job. Her work has appeared in the New Republic, In These Times, Smithsonian Magazine, and Pacific Standard Magazine. She has investigated online trolls on Black Twitter. She's profiled people with student loan debt, and she's also traced every single use of the word murmur in the Twilight series. She gets to write a wide variety of really fun, interesting stories that run the gamut from investigative to fun culture. And then Milan Polk is a features writer. She has written for the Chicago Tribune, Vulture, Ms. Magazine, and others on everything from Sonic the Hedgehog movie to voting rights. She graduated with a degree in journalism from Northwestern last June with a minor in gender studies. And actually, I'm reading your bio now while I'm realizing you're not noting that your work at the Chicago Tribune was actually, she got one of the coveted fellowships in arts and entertainment. We are going to talk about that a little bit more as well. So these are our panelists, and I had all of them in class, and true to the point that I stay in touch also means that occasionally once you graduate, tap you on the shoulder and say, come back and talk to my class, and it allows me to keep up with my students and my students to hear from people who are in the field. So my first question goes to Rachel. As a writer for a national media outlet, how much of your reporting is always remote, and explain how COVID has changed or not changed that?
Yeah, so first, hi y'all. Glad you're all here. To answer your question, Patty, most of my reporting is done remotely. It kind of always has been. My first feature story for Slate, I did all those interviews over the phone, and that largely hasn't changed through COVID. What has changed is that people are a lot more willing and understanding of the circumstances of reporting from home. So if they hear like construction in the background, they're like, yeah, my dog's gonna bark in a few minutes. So that's really cool. But there are reporters at Slate who have continued to do in-person reporting. We just had a big feature where one of our reporters went to the grocery store that called the police on George Floyd and talked to the family that owned it. He got an exclusive interview with the team who called the police. No one else had talked to him before. So there are some reporters who are still doing in-person reporting. It very much just depends on how comfortable you are with doing that. But a lot of what I do doesn't necessarily require that kind of like in-person interaction. So yeah, in terms of like my reporting schedule, it's largely stays the same. A lot of the reporting I do isn't necessarily talking to people, but a lot of research or kind of analyzing things, like the murmur piece, where it was mostly just compiling a lot of stuff into an Excel spreadsheet. A piece I'm working on now just requires me to listen to like hours and hours of interviews. But yeah, so there's a lot of kind of room for like remote reporting that a lot of people have been doing since before this.
I read that exclusive piece with the interview with the family at the store. It was really incredible. And I actually really love that you're reminding us that we so often narrowly define reporting as going and sticking a microphone or a notebook in someone's face. But reporting is actually information gathering in such a wide range of context, data, books, research, listening to publicly available documents, all that kind of thing. So that's a lovely point. Maddie, I'm going to go to you now. You started remote reporting for the New York Times while still in graduate school. Essentially, you were doing contact tracing, right? And I'm kind of wondering how that worked in a remote environment, and what was the learning curve for that kind of reporting at the beginnings of the nation's understanding of the pandemic?
Yeah, so hi everyone. Also, thanks for joining us. So yeah, working on that project was really an interesting experience, and actually one that Patty helped connect me to get that opportunity. So in the beginning, we actually went in and we basically just had this huge spreadsheet, and it sounds really bizarre now, but we were tracking every single reported case of coronavirus in the US. So every new announced case would be a new line in a spreadsheet, which given the scale now, obviously didn't continue that way.
How did you, I'm just going to interrupt for a sec. How, when you say announced by whom? Like, how were you tracking it or finding it?
Yeah, so we had this whole Twitter list of public health officials, public health departments. It was I remember putting together like a list of every single county in California and a link to their like coronavirus tracking page. So it was basically just scraping the internet for whatever we could find. And so, yeah, one of the most interesting parts actually was watching how it evolved, because obviously we couldn't keep tracking every single case and their age and their information as time went on. So more and more we were tracking clusters. We were calling nursing homes. We were calling meatpacking plants. And so yeah, we really saw the project evolve, and the spreadsheet itself went through a lot of different iterations over the course of the months I was working there. And in terms of the learning curve, I think one of the biggest lessons for me was working on a huge team and really communicating, because at the beginning it was very small. There was just a few reporters, which was exciting, but then it continued to grow. And basically just figuring out how can we communicate information when people are working in shifts, how can we make sure that everyone's on the same page, because basically if I put something in the spreadsheet that is unclear, it makes things so much harder for people down the line. So I think just being part of such a massive project with so many different moving parts was one of the most exciting things for me.
I'm curious, I mean, so you were still in grad school, and I know that some of the original team was, but it sounded to me like you were very much treated as equals, that here you were just starting your career, but everybody was grabbing at any information they could and trying to figure out how to do it. Is that what it felt like, even though you were working for the New York Times? Were you kind of an underling, or were you all in it at the same level?
No, yeah, I think we definitely, that was also important, is everyone was very much treated with respect, and our work was, I think they really made an effort to acknowledge that our work was important, and because they just needed so many people to be working on it, there were a wide variety of people, from students to people who were at the Times. And so, but yeah, it was very much collaborative, and I think that's what made it successful, was that everyone really respected each other's work, and we really had to lean on each other a lot.
Excellent. I think that's one of the other myths of reporting, is that it's the solo job, but actually we work as journalists often in teams, even if it's writer and editor. Almost no editorial decision is made in a singular vacuum, right? That we learn that we all end up working together and bouncing ideas off of each other, and that hopefully strengthens both the strength of the reporting, the writing, and the sort of ethics and values we bring to the editing process. So and I have a million questions already about some of the things you said, and I'm sure some of the students listening do too. And I just want to remind you all to go ahead and start populating the chat as questions come up, because Stacey Simpson and I will monitor and try to get back to some of those questions. Milan, you're next. You got this coveted fellowship at the Chicago Tribune this summer in the entertainment section, and I know you really wanted to do arts and entertainment reporting. And you obviously had gone to school here in Evanston, but it wasn't like you knew Chicago intimately, because you're from the Baltimore area. And then, of course, with COVID and social distancing, you found yourself sitting in your bedroom in the Baltimore area, trying to figure out how to report on arts and entertainment in Chicago, several states away. How in the world did you develop story ideas about a city that you really only knew peripherally?
Yeah. So, like you said, I'm from like outside of the Baltimore area. So I saw someone was from Potomac. Hello. I developing story ideas was definitely difficult at first, because I've never lived in Chicago. Obviously Northwestern's in Evanston, so it's a little bit removed from the main city center. I would say that my first week, I really just tried to ask a lot of questions. I was given more story ideas the first week that I was there, so I got a chance to get to know the city and get to know people within the city. My first story was talking with music venues and how they're dealing with, the pandemic and whether or not they want to open up. So it was definitely a lot of taking notes and asking questions. Another big thing that I did was taking a lot of notes in pitch meetings, brainstorming and talking with editors and trying to figure out what are people in the city focusing on right now, what's important to them, versus what would be, important to someone in a different city. And also just, of course, research. As Rachel said, a lot of arts and entertainment can be done online. So it's a lot of talking with people via phone calls, but mostly, research and understanding, like following people on Twitter, following people on Facebook, and looking to see what they're talking about. It's really just a lot of for me, at least, it was a lot of social media and also talking with editors and bouncing ideas off of them. And after that first week, it really just I kind of got into a rhythm of like pitching ideas and talking with people and understanding what was important to them. And after that first week, it really got it a lot easier. So yeah.
Excellent. Okay, I'm gonna ask a question of all three of you, but we'll go in the same order, Rachel, Maddie, Milan. And I have taught the introductory news and news reporting and writing class for several years, and I know that somehow there's nothing more terrifying than that first person on the street interview where we make you all go talk to somebody and stop on the street and ask them questions. And it took me a while to realize that almost equally as intimidating was picking up the phone and dialing instead of texting or some of the other ways we communicate. So I'm wondering, what is your best advice for phone reporting and even cold calling sources? Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is that kind of nervousness never goes away, and it's also just a good sign. It means that you care about what you're talking about, and if you care about the person that you're talking about. I would say the moment that you're not nervous to talk to someone, I would be kind of worried about what the interview is going to turn out to be like. In terms of on the phone reporting, I would say always wait a few seconds after somebody stops talking, because usually people don't really like silence. It can feel really uncomfortable, but they'll often kind of fill in the gap and keep talking, and you'll kind of get a little bit more that way. I've gotten a lot of really good answers that way, not from questions that I asked, but just from people continuing what they're talking about. But also just making sure that it's a conversation. It's not just you necessarily just asking questions. It's you kind of giving like your thoughts, not like getting super involved, but like just making sure that you're also kind of talking to them. I think would probably be my tips.
Those are good ones. I really like that. How about you, Maddie?
Yeah, I think definitely agree with what Rachel was saying. And kind of on that note, with leaving space, I always like to, and this applies to in-person reporting too, but I always like to ask at the end, like what else would you like to add, or like some variation of a really open-ended question. And that often gets like really interesting responses of maybe something that I didn't even think to ask, but that's kind of been in the back of their mind the whole interview. And in terms of like just logistics, for phone reporting, maybe this is something that you all are finding on remote learning as well, but I find it a little bit harder to focus when I'm not in person. So I definitely, my kind of method is to record the call with an app or with a transcription service, and then take kind of vague notes of just what timestamps or what general themes we're talking about, because then I'm staying focused by taking some form of notes, but not worrying about getting down every word. And that's kind of what I think works best for me in terms of getting all the information and being able to check back later, but still being kind of present and in the conversation in the moment.
I like that. How about you, Milan?
Yeah, I agree. I love to take notes during phone interviews. It's like one of the things that I use as well for transcription services, if anyone ever needs it, is Otter. It's free, and you get like 600 minutes a month. It's great. Yeah, it's pretty reliable. I love it. But yeah, I'd say definitely taking notes. Having your questions out in front of you is hugely important. You know, I know some people like to do it off the cuff, but even, I always try to brainstorm like, 10 questions just to have them, even if I go off the book, just to kind of have some idea of what the story's about and what the main focus of the piece is, what you really, really want from this person. And also, don't be afraid to ask for a follow-up interview. I think that, your interview does not need to all be encompassed into one phone call. It's not, especially if you have an interviewer who, can only talk for 10 minutes. I've had people who are like, oh, I really got to go. We can talk another time. And sometimes you just have to pick up the phone, the next day or 2 days later, or however long it takes to try to get the questions that really, really matter. Yeah. So I would say, definitely taking notes and making sure that you just are well prepared with notes or whatever you need for the interview, because it's hard to be caught off guard, and you need every single second that you can to get the questions out and to get the answers that you need.
On this topic of interviewing, I see some amazing questions coming up in the chat, and I hope we can get to most of them, but just to keep it focused right now to this question about interviewing, Rachel, I'm going to punt back to you because you mentioned that you never stop being nervous about picking up the phone and making that call. And I lost the question. One of the students, Kelsey, says, when handling the nerves of the interview, how do you make sure that your nerves don't affect the quality of the interview? And so I'll start with you, but and of course, Maddie and Milan, jump in if you have thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I mean, as Milan and Maddie said, being prepared with the questions that you have kind of really helps. Kind of knowing what you want to ask, knowing in general the information. If you're kind of chasing a story that's already been covered, knowing what that person has already said in other interviews also helps, because that means you can kind of like steer the interview towards information that is new. And then I think the nerves also kind of just sublimate after about 5 minutes on a call generally. But I think that coming in like really prepared helps, but also being flexible at the same time. If the interview goes in a direction that you weren't expecting, but that's interesting, kind of not being afraid to like go in that direction. That's one of the reasons why I don't really necessarily take notes when I'm doing an interview, is so that I can really pay attention to what the person is saying. I'm kind of the opposite of what Maddie said, where I can focus really well from just staring out of a window, which is what's great about remote reporting. So it means that asking follow-up questions that I hadn't necessarily planned for. So kind of just getting like really interested in what the person is saying turns it more into a conversation and less of a, I'm interrogating you. If it's a combative interview, which inevitably you might end up doing, I don't think those nerves are really going to go away for the entire interview. But it's helpful in that it keeps you on your feet, because it's kind of an antagonistic phone call in that scenario. So in those scenarios, I would just say, take a deep breath afterwards.
So I think, okay, so I have so many directions I want to take this. And first I want to just point out, I like that both Maddie and Rachel, you talked about like, you can focus looking out a window. Maddie's like, I know I can get distracted just listening. Knowing who you are in the call and prepping for that is going to be really important. But I think one of the reasons people are afraid of the person on the street, or that nervousness of picking up the phone, is this kind of perception we're always afraid that somehow it's going to turn combative. Like, what if that person doesn't really want to talk to me? And in my experience, even the combative interviews tend not to be as bad as you think they're going to be. And in the balance, like what percentage are really truly combative and which aren't, and how would you define that? And anyone can jump in. I know I'm pushing back on Rachel here, but everybody else feel like you can raise your hand if you want to speak on that too.
Yeah, I haven't had a lot of combative interviews. And if I think that I'm going to ask a question that is going to get a negative response, I save it for the end. And one of the ways that I kind of get around the antagonism is to just say, my editor has this question. And you kind of just take the onus off of you in that way. And you just be like, I didn't really want to ask this, but like my editor really wants to know. Or like people are saying. And it's kind of this way to kind of just get around like the negativity. But I kind of think with interviewing, just take advantage of the social contract, which is like most people aren't going to get in your face in the moment, unless like it's a very charged situation, in which case like I think you'll be like a little bit more prepared and be a bit older in those scenarios. But yeah, I think just be as polite as you can, kind of push the blame on as many different people as you can. It's not made to feel like I really have to get this story.
Throw your editor under the bus.
Yeah, exactly. You're never gonna meet your editor, and so you just put your editor under your, like, that's kind of my way to get around that.
I just, full disclosure, my entire career in journalism before teaching was as an editor. So, and I actually told my writers, throw me under the bus. Then make them fight me if they have to. I don't know, Milan or Maddie, if you have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I guess I also think there are different reasons people are not necessarily combative, but maybe it's like a more uncomfortable interview. So kind of tuning yourself to that, I think. So while I was doing the New York Times of the coronavirus mapping, there were a lot of times I was calling nursing homes and they just didn't really want to share information about cases. Or I think in those cases, it's kind of like we would frame it as I'm trying to confirm these numbers that we've seen elsewhere versus like I have no information and I need the information from you can be helpful. In other cases, I think some sources might just not, they might have had bad experiences with media in the past, or they might not be comfortable with how media works. In those cases, I think being really sensitive to explaining what your role is as a reporter, what their role is as a source, kind of being really transparent about what the process looks like can be really helpful. I've had sources where they're really nervous about how, I guess, the accuracy or how they're going to be portrayed. So I think also offering to fact check with them before publication has been really helpful for me, just giving them a phone call and making sure like they know that I am representing everything accurately can help people who are not combative, but like uncomfortable with the interview, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction. I would guess that the number of combative interviews is small, but the number of interviews where people are reticent or reluctant and it's their own fear of media or being, I mean, frankly, I get afraid of being misquoted. So I think that's a very good understanding of what's going on. And I do love the idea of transparency, that a limited number of people really know how media works. And so the more you can deconstruct what's going on and be honest about it, makes people think, oh, well, you're one of the good ones. Milan, it looked like you were about to say something too. Jump in.
Yeah, I was gonna say, while working at the Tribune, like there were definitely a lot of people who would be like, oh, can you not use my name and things like that. And that's definitely not, a common thing that's done at the Tribune. So I had to push back and be like, no, we have to use your name. And kind of like, and also with like getting photos and things like that, like people definitely, only have so much they know about the media and the inner workings of it. And yeah, I mean, like Maddie said, it really is just about, talking with them and understanding why they might be uncomfortable. I've never really had a combative interview, but like Maddie said, it's really just like people who might be uncomfortable or might be afraid of being misquoted. So it is a lot of honesty and being like, this is what the story is, this is what it's about, this is what, I'm talking to you about. Just echoing a lot of those same thoughts. But yeah, I've definitely had moments where people have been like, oh, can you not use my name? Can you not use my photo? But then after, and it's usually for like simple things, like it's arts and entertainment. So I haven't really done anything that's like, going to blow back on them in any awful way. It's just people being uncomfortable. So it's a lot of understanding like why, what about this makes you uncomfortable? How can I help? Is there anything that I can explain to you that might better help you understand what the story is about and what your role in it is? I think just when people feel like they're not going to be taken advantage of and their words aren't going to be misused, they just feel a lot more comfortable and they're way more willing to talk with you. Even if it's just, something simple, sometimes people can be really nervous just about their names and their photos being used.
So these are all great tips for all the people who are reticent to talk to journalists, but we have a question here about what do you do about the ramblers? The people who just won't stop talking about the thing that you really are not remotely interested in, or you've got what you need. And I want to pair that with another question about how has Zoom possibly changed some of those dynamics? So I don't know who wants to go first. Should I just pick on Rachel again and have you go first?
Yeah. I am honestly not great at cutting people off. So I have an issue with ramblers and that I'll just have hours of interview that I don't necessarily need. So, I mean, in that case, it's really just about, again, saying like, I have a limited amount of time. And I really just want to make sure that you're quoted accurately and that like, I get like the fullest picture from you as possible. So can we talk about this or can we talk about X, Y, and Z? Basically just kind of making it about like, this is about you. And I want to make sure that you're coming off as you want to, basically. And kind of just going off what Milan and Maddie are saying about making them comfortable, basically just like full transparency. I can't use majority of what you're saying unless it's a Q&A. So I'm going to use maybe like 3 or 5 quotes. So I really just want to make sure that like you're saying what's important to you so that I have that information available to me. And Zoom, I've only done Zoom interviews maybe 3 or 4 times since the pandemic started, mostly for profile. And that was just because I wanted face-to-face interaction with somebody that I was going to be like writing a lot of words about. And in that scenario, I would say that, I mean, one of the things about profile writing is that you're kind of trying to describe somebody's mannerisms, and that's really hard to pick up over Zoom. And so adding that kind of like color line in about like, they did this with their hands or like X, Y, and Z, like it's kind of just about paying attention to what the person is saying, but also what they're doing. So, like anything that's happening in the background. Someone I was talking to had roosters crowing in the background. And so that was just something I noticed during the interview. And so like those little things have changed the kind of dynamic. So I haven't really done like a lot of Zoom reporting just because phone reporting is kind of easier to set up in a lot of ways for most people.
Maddie and Milan, do you want to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, I would also say I'm not the best at cutting off ramblers. And I definitely end up with usually a lot more information than I can include. So yeah, like Rachel said, I think being clear if you have a very limited time frame, if you really need to get a couple of questions in, just kind of gently guiding the conversation back on track. But also, sometimes I get really interesting additional story ideas from people who kind of go off on a tangent. So I think knowing what you need to get, but also being open to what else could come from the interview is important. And then in terms of Zoom interviews, I sometimes prefer Zoom, or we use a lot of WebEx, or just these various platforms. Sometimes I like it just to kind of break the ice and have more of a personal connection, but that's kind of just my preference. So I think it's still like definitely not the same as an in-person meeting, and it's still definitely dealing with a lot of technical difficulties sometimes. But I think I kind of like the Zoom interview and just kind of seeing who the person I'm talking to is.
Do you record them, or do you also take notes during a Zoom interview the way you would a phone interview or a live interview?
Yeah, usually I do the same. I'll Zoom lets you record, so I record and then I transcribe that later, put it in order, and then take notes, just kind of with general ideas of what's going on.
Excellent. Milan, did you want to add to that too, or do you want me to move on?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to add, like, also don't be afraid to ask the same question again. Sometimes if people go off script or kind of forget where they're going, I mean, they might not even realize that you're asking the same question, and it can just help to recenter them and get them back on track. So, but yeah, just echoing the same thing that they said, taking notes and yeah, just making sure that you know what you're getting, what you want to get out of this and focusing on that, I mean, I definitely also have ramblers and it's hard to cut them off. I mean, if you can find a break, sometimes you can cut them in and tell them, actually, turning back to this point. But yeah, it can be hard because people just kind of start talking and just really get into whatever they're talking about.
That's actually good advice. I see that we're getting a couple questions about what you learned at Medill versus what you're doing in real life. So we're getting questions about where did you do your journalism residency? And so obviously a bunch of we do have a required quarter where students go work at a media outlet somewhere that we call JR. And did you do a JR that fits with what you're doing now, as well as questions about what were introductory reporting classes like? What does it feel like to be in a Medill class? And I think that those are sort of part and parcel of a question about what did you do, without getting into which classes you loved or hated. What did you do in class that was extremely relevant to internships and your now jobs, and what was tangential but you still use? So whether you worked at a magazine for JR but are now doing newspaper reporting or vice versa, I think that sort of what does it feel like to be in those classes, and how did it benefit you, and what did you take from it? That's an example of how not to ask a right question, because I made it very big and rambling, but I think they sort of know where I'm going. And I'm just gonna keep doing this order I have on my screen. So Rachel, you can go first again.
Yeah, so I did my journalism residency at New America, which is a think tank in DC. One of the reasons I did it, just full transparency, was that they paid the best. That's kind of one of the most important things in my career so far, is that I can't do unpaid or underpaid things. And I would say that don't settle for unpaid or underpaid things if you can. But at first glance, America seems like a very strange thing to do. I was a magazine journalism student. I don't think y'all still have tracks like that, but New America had basically like a weekly publication that was opinion writing, and that was my first kind of introduction to opinion writing. And they also had a partnership with Slate, and so I met some Slate people through that internship, and they helped me get a job at Slate like 2 years later, basically. But kind of getting into like the first years of Medill were really kind of focused on news reporting, which I kind of came into Medill knowing I didn't necessarily want to do. I didn't really necessarily believe in like subjectivity or any of that, and I didn't feel like that was necessarily a good place for me. And so getting to do opinion journalism in that way was kind of very clarifying. And I ended up at publications that are very much about having a point of view. And then, what was the second half of the question?
Well, just sort of what kinds of things you were doing in class that were especially relevant, and then what kinds of things seemed irrelevant, but maybe you're using now today.
Okay, yeah. So in terms of relevance, I think a lot of the feature writing classes or feature editing classes have been very helpful. I think that they kind of give you like a very basic overview of how to structure a long piece. And I think that's something that a lot of early career journalists don't necessarily know how to do, but really want to. And so having that base, which was provided a lot by Patti, was very helpful. I honestly just used one of the assignments that she gave us in my last year in a recent feature that I was writing. You let us restructure a feature, and often editors will tell you that you have to completely restructure a piece, which is terrifying, but kind of having that base of knowledge was really helpful. Honestly, at the time, I was like, I don't really understand why I'm doing this, but I'm going to do it for my assignment. And so kind of getting that mandate to be like, you need to completely reform this piece in like X, Y, and Z, like kind of like cutting and stitching things back together. I was like, wow, that assignment Patti gave me was really helpful.
Didn't make her say that, I promise.
No.
But I love the pitch toward how editing skills actually help you as writers, definitely. Let's see, Maddie, how would you answer this sort of question about this relationship between what you were doing in classes and JR and what you're doing now?
Sure. Yeah, so I did my JR at Smithsonian Magazine in DC, which was awesome. And I guess my progression was kind of, I came to Northwestern not even knowing if I wanted to do journalism. And then over the years, I kind of felt like I honed what I wanted to do and what kind of journalism I wanted to do. And I guess my classes and my JR kind of all fed into that. At Smithsonian, I wrote kind of a variety of pieces, but a lot of science, environment, and health reporting. And that kind of helped me figure out that that was something I really liked and something I wanted to continue doing, and something I'm still doing now in a slightly different format. And I have to shout out also Patti's health and science reporting class for that, just because I think that subject area maybe wasn't something I had thought that deeply about, but something that really, in the end, became a really good fit. So I feel like that was kind of my progress was, do I want to do journalism? Yes. What kind of journalism do I want to do? Oh, maybe health, environment, and science is interesting. And I think doing the JR was what really, I don't know, it made it feel more concrete and gave me a better sense of like what it actually felt like to be in the industry and be working and putting all these things into practice. So I hope that answers some of that question.
So, but also now you're really doing newspaper reporting, right? And even though you're more focused on magazine and feature writing in school, how does one help the other and vice versa?
Yeah, so I'm kind of in this, I guess, kind of in an in-between now. It's digital, and our team's really small, so I kind of have a lot of freedom to do a lot of different things. But I think having the magazine kind of thought process of, I guess, being very intentional about what the story is about and finding the narrative and finding kind of interesting characters is something I try to bring even in shorter stories, and even in, yeah, I kind of in all my reporting, I feel like I try to bring in that intention of having a strong narrative and having kind of a through line through all my reporting.
Excellent. Milan?
Yeah, I did my JR at Vulture, which is exactly what I wanted to do. It was my number one choice. Yeah, so mostly when I was there, I did news briefs, which are really just short, condensed pieces about like basically like breaking news or anything that like is basically trending. And that really gave me a great foundation for arts and entertainment reporting because I didn't really have a lot of like extensive reporting in it. And also it just helped me write things quicker. Before I had no idea how to write a story, like a 500-piece story, like the day of, and really hone that in. I mean, I did because of Medill, but being in a newsroom is different from just learning about it in class and just writing about it. So that's why Medill has this great experience, because it's completely different to hear about it and kind of do a little bit of practice in it, but to do it every single day is something that you really can't learn anywhere but a newsroom. And especially being in a digital first newsroom, it definitely focused on getting things out quickly, but also having a strong voice and really trying to see what people are talking about right now, it's versus maybe a newspaper or a magazine reporting experience. Yeah, and so I think what I learned from Medill as well, though, was really just about like everyone said, those first 2 years are really a lot of just hard news reporting, and that even though I knew it wasn't what I wanted to do, it really did teach me the basics of how to come up and talk to people and not be nervous. How to write things, and also how to do things, how to have a multimedia mind. I mean, I'm a writer first and foremost, and I don't have a lot of experience doing audio or video, but at Medill we did all of those things in our first 2 years. So I still had an idea of what it means to write things and what it means to create a story and have an eye for something multimedia, especially if you're digital first. You have to think about, how is this story going to look if we record it with video or audio. And that kind of helped me in the Tribune, because I have done stories now where there's video involved or there's audio involved, and thinking about how my writing will go along with that, and how the stories that I'm reporting can look different in different ways, and how to use subjects and what they've said to kind of make a story that people will be interested in regardless of the medium. So yeah.
Excellent. We're getting a lot of questions on similar themes. Stacey, is it okay if I sort of summarize rather than call out specific questions? There's a lot of questions just about the curriculum. And I feel like there's a lot of different ways that you can look for that information. And maybe Sarah Stacey can put in some links to specific curriculum. But because you've all noted that the first 2 years feel more news oriented, your first 2 years, you're doing introductory reporting and writing, introductory multimedia reporting, and then an intensive experiential reporting class comes sophomore year. But those you can do. We have several classes now where you take it half in the winter, half in the spring, and over spring break you go somewhere like China or Argentina or Hong Kong. Well, Hong Kong's in China. I mean, we have these trips all over the world. So or one of them concentrates on the Chicago Cubs and the neighborhoods around it and the politics of those neighborhoods. So there's an intensive experiential reporting class sophomore year, junior and senior year. You can choose different kinds of electives. You could choose different kinds of feature writing classes. You can choose broadcast editing or magazine editing. And so, yes, for those of you who are asking about how that works, that happens more junior, senior year. But there's a lot. You can start that process sophomore year. So you can start to put your fingers in different things. But the other piece of it, of course, is what kinds of campus media help you figure out what kind of media you like and don't like. And I'm seeing a bunch of questions about how do you balance extracurricular campus media and classwork, as well as how realistic is campus media to what you're experiencing now in the workforce. So if we could maybe take that set of questions about how did you balance campus media work if you did it, and how useful has it been or not been to your current job. So who wants to go first? I keep picking on y'all. Does anyone want to take that? Okay, go for it, Milan.
Yeah, I worked on North by Northwestern when I was on campus, and that was a digital first publication, but also had a print magazine section, which I worked on. So I kind of had both of those aspects. And I'll say that working, going to classes at Medill and then doing, North by Northwestern at the same time, I really enjoyed it. And I think that especially when you're a freshman or sophomore, joining North by Northwestern or, the fashion publication, the food publication, all the publications that we have on campus, those are really where you're going to test your skills and have an environment where you can try and fail. And I would say that it really did help me get a good foundation of what it's like to work in a newsroom environment. It isn't exactly the same thing as what I've worked in, now that I've graduated, but I will say that it definitely gives you that first glance at things and a first look at what it means to be in a newsroom and working with other people on something. And I would say like the balance, I think that is something that it's hard for student journalists because it's very, very easy for someone who's really passionate about journalism to just like do nothing but journalism. Like I know people at the Daily Northwestern who like would just like live in the newsroom. And I think that I think that that's why it's so important as a student journalist to have other extracurriculars or to have, other things that you do outside of journalism. Not just because of, the break that it gives you, but also because, you're a person with a life and you want to explore other things. But yeah, so I think that balance is really just knowing when, you need to tap out and take a break, knowing when you need to go home and focus on homework, knowing when you need to go home just to take a break and just to do other things. I think it's, it's not, I would say it's, for the high school equivalent, like being in a club is a bit different than being in a club in college. It's a bit more intensive. It has a bit more of a focus and you spend a lot more time in a newsroom on campus than you might in high school, at least from what I remember when I was on my high school newspaper. But yeah, like I said, it really just is taking that time to know, when you need a break and when you need to tap out, because it's really, really easy as a student journalist on campus to want to always be, in the newsroom and always want to help out and do something. So yeah.
Maddie, how about you? I know you spent a lot of time at the Daily.
Yes. So I worked at the Daily Northwestern while I was at Northwestern, and there were some quarters where I kind of lived in the newsroom and spent a lot of long hours there. But yeah, I think like Milan said, it's a lot of knowing yourself and knowing. There were some quarters where I was just like, I really want to focus a lot on the Daily and focus on dedicating a lot of my time to just putting in a lot of writing work, a lot of editing work. And I think I would definitely recommend to anyone, wherever you end up, to join campus media in whatever area you can, because I learned so much from my peers at the Daily. When I was first joining, I learned so much from the older students who were already experienced, and then getting to be an editor. I was a managing editor my junior year. And just having that experience also of making editorial decisions and kind of being a leader, I think is also really valuable if that's something you want to dedicate yourself to. So yeah, definitely finding that balance was hard, and there were some times where I think I overworked myself a little bit. But I think just having the experience of really putting into practice everything you're learning in classes and kind of being in it was really valuable to me.
How on those quarters where you were living in the newsroom, I don't want to scare everybody. Were you taking fewer classes, or were you purposely not taking journalism classes those quarters, or balancing? There are definitely journalism classes that are heavier workloads than others, and everybody sort of talks and knows what those are. How did you find that mix? I can say as the professor that we don't take too kindly to people turning in stories late because they were working at the Daily. So students tend to keep it quiet if that's what's pushing them in that way. But I'm curious how you thought about it in terms of classes and workload.
Yeah, so it's definitely kind of a balancing act, but I think I was pretty intentional about when I was applying to be a managing editor, which I knew would be more time and more effort. I made sure that my workload was going to be manageable. I think I took just like a slightly lighter, less writing heavy quarter to make sure I would have the time to keep completing all my schoolwork and also doing my best work I could at the daily and being proud of the work I was doing in both of those areas.
Yeah, and absolutely, that's a big difference between high school and college, right? That you get to choose a little bit about what each quarter is going to feel like academically in a way that you don't necessarily have that freedom in high school. Rachel, what would you add to this mix?
Yeah, so I didn't really get involved with campus media until my junior year. Before that, I was interning for the alumni magazine, which is kind of a different track from student-run magazine, and that the people running the alumni magazine are like employees of the university, like, so they're like adults. So I think it was very helpful in kind of learning. Like, I think with student media, because you're edited by students, there's kind of a lot more leeway. And with the alumni magazine, because you're edited by adults, you're kind of writing towards a very specific voice and tone, which is something that like you kind of learn to do as you start working from a publication. Again, I kind of did that because it was paid and I needed an on-campus job. And then my junior year, I got involved. I was editor of Spectrum, which I don't know if it still exists, but it was the Daily Northwestern's opinion column for marginalized voices. And so I co-edited that with one of my friends who was already doing it and brought me on. And I think having editing experience, it was my first like real editing experience outside of class, was definitely, I think, something that I've carried with me as I've continued in my career, kind of knowing like what I want in an editor, kind of understanding where editors are coming from. A lot of the Spectrum columnists are people who have never written for the Daily Northwestern or have never written a journalism piece. And so turning a draft that sounds like a college paper into like a piece of opinion journalism was like a skill that I kind of figured out, and it helped me figure out what works best in writing opinion versus like writing for like a professor or something. And so that was a cool experience. So yeah, I guess I would say like get involved in student journalism, but there are also like there are paid opportunities, I think, on a lot of campuses to like write for those kind of like, I think in Northwestern you can write for the English alumni journal or whatever. And so like those opportunities are really good if you're somebody who needs like a work study job and you're also taking a class load. And so you can't necessarily get involved in like super involved in campus media. So I think those opportunities are definitely something that a lot of students don't know to look for.
Great advice. We have one question on the chat that I love. How many hours do you generally work in a day? And how does a day being a journalist look like right now? So you can take from your most recent experience or what you're currently doing. And Rachel, I'm going to start with you again because your face is on screen, and then we'll go down the line.
So how many hours do I work right now? It really depends. Generally, my workday is from about 10 to 6 or 10 to 6:30. It really depends on what's going on. The cool
That's
thing
really
about
classic New York too. I want to
yeah.
New York media. It's very much a 10 to 6, 10 to 7 workplace. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, but I haven't worked a 9 to 5. I haven't gone to work earlier than like, I've gone to work at like 8:45 for like podcast tapings, and that's it. Like I refuse to be in the office before then. But now because we're kind of working from home, it's really just depends. Like I'll be online in case my editor wants to like Slack me or something. But if this week I'm working kind of on a feature, so I'm pretty much setting my own schedule. So like I'll get up later or I'll end up working later if I'm like just like have to keep working basically. So I would say I probably work between like 8 to 9 hours a day. It really depends. Sometimes I'll work later than that, but Slate is unionized. So that means that we have comp time. So if we end up working over what we're supposed to, or like people who had to work on Monday to cover the Amy Coney Barrett confirmation hearings, that means they get a day off later. So, I mean, that's definitely something to look for in your like workplace or unionized workplaces, because they have like a lot kind of more strict rules about like hours worked. Like we're still salaried, so we don't get overtime, but like if you're working an extra 4 hours a day, you can ask for a half day off later. So I generally just try not to work too many extra hours, but I feel like I need a comp day, basically, is how I kind of figure it out.
Maddie, how about you? That's really interesting.
Yeah, so I would say my workday is generally a 9 to 5 with like sometimes a little bit added on either end. So I guess what the day looks like kind of depends. We have our morning meeting every day at 9:15, which is over WebEx now. And so it's for the digital team and also the TV side, because we're kind of a combo publication company, to kind of discuss what everyone's working on for the day and plan. And then it just kind of depends on, some days I'm doing more interviews, some days I'm doing more writing. I like to be working on a couple different stories at a time. So I'll have something in the works while I'm writing something, and then I'll be doing outreach for another story. But yeah, it kind of just depends on what I have set up for the day. And I work from my living room now. So I'm doing a lot of calls and a lot of writing basically. And sometimes I go out and report in person with socially distanced, masked interviews. But yeah.
So we have taken it all the way up to the end and past when I was supposed to wrap things up for Bryce. So Milan, I'm going to have to just say thank you, and rather than giving you a chance to answer that question, thank you to all three of you. And now I'm going to turn things back over to Stacy Simpson. And thanks again to everyone who joined us.
Thank you, Patty, for leading us in that wonderful discussion, and to our awesome alums. Thank you so much again for your time today. And I think I'm thrilled to hear of the successes you are all having. And I think you're wonderful role models for everyone in this audience today. So thanks again. And I'm happy to report that Colette Lauture from New Jersey is the big winner of our Medill hat today. So Colette, I'll be sending that to you soon. And we do still have a few programs left in our series, and we hope that you'll go to our website. You can find links there to register for the upcoming programs. And as I mentioned earlier, I will be sending you a direct email with the link to the recording of this session as soon as we get our captioning added to that. So everybody, thanks again for coming, and hope you all have a fabulous afternoon. Take care.
Thank you.